MFC stands for Microsoft Foundation Classes, and it is a fundamental API or application programming interface whereby you can create standardized Windows programs. This means that the MFC embodies all that we need to equip our C++ programs with the Graphical User Interface, or GUI. The MFC is a great way to create interfaces for Windows programs in C++ and other languages, but we've been studying C++ lately, and it gives you a lot of the things that we're familiar with in a Windows application or program, the API or application programming interface. Minimize, maximize buttons, toolbars, text fields, C-edit controls, static text fields are labels and list boxes and comma boxes, things like that. A standard wizard-generated MFC application is often too bloated and complex for simple C++ projects and games, so we're going to learn how to create our own from scratch. And when you first run the wizard to generate a new project, I'm going to do new project. I'm in Visual Studio 2010, of course. And if I choose MFC application, I'll go over here, and let's make a folder called example. And that's where we will create this new solution here for now. Alright, so I'm going to run the wizard real quick just to show you. And notice all these different options here. You can wade through them and click on them one by one, or you can just click next. But there are a lot of options when you run the wizard as far as creating the project. And Microsoft likes to separate everything into documents and views, and the back end from the front end and so forth. And here are I'm just going to go with all the defaults here in the wizard. So when I do as an empty project, this is what Visual Studio will create for me. And it'll take care of instances of C1 app or classes that derive from C1 app and C Dialog and C frame window and so forth. But you can see all of these header files, and you can see all of these resource file objects and resource files, and you can see all of these CPP source files. Okay, and now it's parsing, in this case having to go through all of the included files for the project. So even an empty project, when you run the wizard, can be loaded with lots of files and dependencies and code and things, just to kind of give us that basic Windows application interface that we're used to. However, for the small projects we're going to be working on, just small games that use one window or maybe at the most 3 or 4 windows or dialogues, we don't need all this, and so we want to simplify it. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some of the wizard generated code, and we're just going to kind of hack it down to the bare minimum that we need for our project. And that'll be a good way to learn the MFC and what different functions and objects do in the MFC without all of that large amount of wizard generated code. But before we do that, I just wanted to kind of show you what a default application looks like. Alright, so we've built an empty project now, and these are all of our files here. I'll just open a few of them. So C++ along with some of that Windows macro code, and let's go ahead and build the solution. And we'll run it. Okay, and this is here's our empty project so far, right here. Okay, so a lot of the things that we're used to in a Windows program. So it does do a lot for you, but we're not going to be using the wizard a lot, at least not in these first few examples, because it doesn't really warrant it. The things that we're going to be doing don't really require this large number of wizard generated objects, precompiled headers and header files and CPP source files and so forth. So looking at that, let's take a look at creating a simpler, more scaled down MFC application with maybe just one or a few dialogues. The first thing I want to do is create an empty Win32 project in Visual Studio. So we're going to go ahead and close this solution. And we're going to generate a new solution and a new project here. And this time I'm going to choose Win32 project, right? So Win32 project. And I will put it in its own directory. Make them up here. And let's see. We'll make a folder here. And well, we'll just call it, how about we just call it game. Alright, simple game, whatever. Alright, so it's going to be a Win32 project. And we'll call it game. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And when I do, you can click next or you can click here, either way, but just select empty project. Again, if you didn't do that, it would add, additional header files and things in that you don't necessarily need or won't use in a very simple project. Okay, and then application type, we want Windows applications to go with all the defaults there, but check empty project, click finish. Alright, and so now you have, header files, resource files, and source files, but nothing's added yet. So we'll, this allows us to manually add just the things that we need. Second, modify the empty project properties to use the MFC in a static library and set incremental linking to no. So I'm going to right click on the project, and I'm going to go down here to properties. And two things the wizard does for us when we select the MFC, we need to set these things manually in Visual Studio 2010 and 2008 if that's what you're using. But under configuration properties and in the general tab, go down to where it says use of MFC, and it says use standard Windows libraries, and choose one of these two options. Use MFC in a static library or use MFC in a shared DLL. Now, the differences are subtle yet profound. If you choose static library, it'll compile the necessary components for MFC applications into your program, which will increase the file size and may bloat it a little bit. That's the downside. The upside is you don't have to worry about whether or not the user has the MFC DLL on their system. Okay, your other option is you could say use MFC in a shared DLL, and if you choose this option, the upside is your program will be smaller, okay, less bloated. The downside being if they don't have that DLL on their system, they'll have to download it before they can run applications utilizing MFC core components. So I'm just going to choose MFC in a static library. Okay, so that's the first property setting or change you want to make to the project. The next one is under the linker category. And in the linker category where it says enable incremental linking, because we're creating a scale down project, let's just say no. We're going to say no to enable incremental linking. I'm going to click on OK. So that's been set up. Third, create a resource file in the resources folder. The next thing I need to do is add a resource file. And that'll be for any dialogues or forms that we draw up or create using the GUI or graphical form design tool in Visual Studio. And so I'm going to add a resource file. I'm just going to say add new item. And it needs to be a .rc resource file. And I'm just going to call this one interface 1. Alright, window 1, interface 1, dialog 1, But if I had multiple dialogues, multiple interfaces, then this would be interface 1. Okay? Fourth, create a dialog within your resource file. So now when I do that, it's just an empty file, and I don't really have any dialog objects or graphical components in it. But it's here under Solution Explorer as a .rc file. So if I either go here or come here and double click, either way, I need to right click with the RC file selected and need to add a resource. Now I'm going to go down and where it says dialog, right? You have all these options here, and you can do toolbars and things like that, menus and so forth. For now, just add a simple dialog, okay? Just a basic dialog there. So I'm going to say new. Okay, and when I do, the wizard adds it, and it's by default it calls it IDD underscore dialog 1. Okay, and we can always go in and modify the properties or the names of these things if we so choose. And since this is interface 1 and this is a dialog with interface 1, and I could have multiple, but we'll just have one. I'm going to go ahead and right click and go down here and properties and scroll down here. And the ID where it says IDD dialog 1, okay, we can modify that or we can change that. So I'm just going to call this IDD interface 1, or if you didn't want to do that, you could just say interface 1. It doesn't have to be IDD. Okay. Now if you do this, Visual Studio automatically creates a resource header file when you add a resource file. And so you just want to check your IDs, make sure you don't have duplicate IDs or anything. Alright, so I'm going to go back over here. And in Solution Explorer, I'm going to go ahead and close this. And now the header file, I'm going to open up the header file. I just want to check it. Okay. And see, that was the default name the wizard gave it, and this is the new name. It wouldn't hurt it to leave both of them in there because they're both the same. But if I choose to call that interface 1 instead of IDD dialog 1, then I can pull that one out. And I'll go ahead and save the changes there. Okay. So far, all the things we've done, we modified 2 properties here on the project. We've added the use of the MFC as a static library, and we disabled incremental linking. And then we added a resource file, and then we added a dialog, just a simple plain vanilla dialog to it. And Visual Studio created the resource header file. So we're all set now. Next, add a CPP source file. Now we just need to add a CPP source file and the bare minimum code that we need to bring up a dialog and just have that window pop up and display. All right, so I'm going to right-click, say Add New Item. And I'm going to go ahead and add a CPP source file. And I'm just going to call this main. It'll serve as sort of a main function. Alright, so I have this available now for sources. Now I need to add the bare minimum boilerplate code for an MFC application. This consists first of writing a class that inherits from either CDialog or CFrame window. For example, here we write a class that inherits from CDialog and includes the MFC boilerplate code. Then you write a class that inherits from C1App and instantiate your first class from within the second. For example, here's a class that inherits from C1App that's instantiating the class that inherits from the CDialog. Finally, add message map tags for the CDialog class and instantiate your C1App class. Example. Take note that the message map is Microsoft's macro code and not C++. The next thing I want to do is I need to put the bare minimum amount of code in here. So again, all that wizard-generated code, there's very little of it that you actually need to get a CDialog to pop up and display and use it in an application. And so I've already put that on the website, so I'm going to hop out over here. And it's listed under 2008, but you can use it just fine for 2010. And I'm going to hop on over to the C++ section as soon as it loads up here. And 2008 MFC projects, and I'm going to go to 2008 MFC template. All right. And I just was messing around, hacking around with the wizard code, trying to see how much I could strip out or rip out and strip it down just to sort of get a bare bones, small, streamlined MFC application. And this is what I came up with. So just grab this code right here, paste it in, and then we just have to customize that code. I just copied it to the clipboard, and I'll try to go through each item and describe it as we go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and paste that from the clipboard. All right, and this is necessary. Both of these includes are necessary for the core MFC components, and of course for source.h, the header file, that holds the IDs for your resource file objects. So you need that. All right. Now next, these are some globals, and I just separated them with comment tags. And this was a pointer that I added to a CEdit controller, but I'll come back to this in a minute. I just left that in as an example, all right? So don't worry about this for now, but let's take a look at these 2 classes here. All right, we have a class that inherits from CDialog, and CDialog is kind of the class for dialogues for your windows and things that pop up in Windows. This could be anything. It's just the name of a class. You can call it banana if you want, but I chose to call it game form. Okay, but you need at least one class that inherits from either CDialog or CFrame window, and in these examples, I'm going to be inheriting from CDialog. Public inheritance, here's the constructor, right? Same name as the class. Now this is just wizard code, so leave that. That's a special pointer. We need that. And this right here is referencing, in this case, the enumerated constant, or the IDD from the parent object. And then game form. So here's an enumerated constant, and this is the dialog that's in your resource file. So remember what I called it? If you do, you're better than me because I don't remember it. Okay, interface 1 is what I call it. All right, so that just needs to match up there. All right, so that just needs to match up there. And we'll come down here. And this is wizard. Again, this is all wizard code. Leave this in, do data exchange. That's necessary if later you decided you wanted to do things with databases or ODBC or ADO or something. you'd want to leave that in there. Okay. Here's a call to the parent classes on init dialog. We're resolving the scope here, and so basically it's just a call to the parent class method on init dialog while we're in the child class on init dialog. Now this is an example. I'm just going to comment these out real quick because we'll come back in and talk about that later. We won't do anything with those yet because right now I just want to focus on the basic structure of an MFC application. All right, so really the only code we have so far is these includes a class that derives from C dialog, the constructor, an enumerated constant that points to your resource file object. All right, that's all public. And then protected, this is wizard generated code. Again, if you're going to do ADO or ODBC or something like that with databases, you want to leave that in. So I chose not to strip that out, but everything else I just stripped out or deleted out of the wizard code. Okay, and so this is boilerplate code. You need on init dialog, and that gets called along with the constructor when you build the class. It's kind of like init in Java. Okay, so this calls the parent class on init dialog, and then here is where you want to set up things. Later we'll set up pointers here. We'll create a cfont object, and we'll color the interface, and there's lots of things we can do in on init dialog when we're building the window, before the window displays, to affect the look and the feel of the interface that the user is going to interact with. And finally, we need a return statement because it returns bool. Now notice that's not the the lowercase bool. That's capital BOOL. Okay, it's a different kind of bool, but it returns true. It's Boolean. Okay, and then finally public. This is not C++, but this is macro code. And in every C dialog where you're going to have buttons or things, where you're going to listen for messages, you need to have declare message map. Looks kind of like Visual Basic almost. There's no semicolons or anything, no braces, but you need that. That's just macro code. And then, of course, just like every C++ class, there's an open and closing curly brace, and it ends with a semicolon. So that's our first class. Our second class inherits from C1App. That's the parent object. Again, you could call this anything you want. I chose to call it the game. All right, so in the public area, we just have a constructor. It doesn't do anything. I could have left it out if I wanted to. But we have an init instance, just like an on init dialog and C dialog, where we have an init instance in C1App. Okay? And let me line that brace up there just to make it pretty. Well, now hopefully it helps you guys. And you'll see something similar in the structure here, okay? In the same way that here in onInit dialog we called the parent class's method onInit dialog, you'll notice that here in an init instance we call the parent class's init instance. And you do something similar in Java a lot of times with a JFrame or a JApplet. You'll do super dot and you'll call the parent class object when you do things. So it's not like it's a freak of nature or anything. That's actually kind of common in APIs. But this is Microsoft's way of doing it. Okay, so we call that. This just defines a registry key. We don't even need it. I'm going to strip it out, but just as an example, if you wanted to create a registry key, that would be how you could do that. You could define one. So I'm going to strip it out. We don't need it. All right, game form. Well, what is game form? Remember, that's the name of our class that's inheriting from the C dialog object. Okay, so whatever you call your C dialog, right, your window. Well, what are you doing? You're building an instance of it, and here you're building an instance, on the stack. All right, there's no pointer there yet, but you're going to use a pointer to access it. So you're going to take MP main window, a pointer here, and you're going to assign it or hand it the address of DLG, the dialog that you built, which is your C dialog class, whatever you called it, banana, apple, game form, whatever. Okay, so you need this. Don't change this. That's wizard code. You need that. That's a special pointer. And then, in this case, int pointer in response DLG do modal. Well, again, that's the instance of, after instantiation, that's the instance of the C dialog object that you built. You call do modal on it, and that gets it to pop up and display. And finally, you return false, because again, you return a bool there. Okay. Now, the only other thing left is we're going to add some empty message map tags. We're not even using them yet. They're not doing anything yet, but we'll need them later. And then the last thing to do is simply build an instance of the application. So I'm building it on the stack here, the game, the app, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm building an instance of this class. Well, when I do, it'll call the constructor, which does nothing, and then an instance, which calls the parent class as an instance, which then turns around and builds the C dialog object, which then turns around and calls the constructor, and then calls on init dialog. So this act of just building an instance of the game here starts the whole process. It starts a chain of cause and effect, or a chain reaction. Gets the ball rolling, so to speak. Okay? And then that starts everything else. But that's not a whole lot there. That's a whole lot smaller and stripped down and more scaled down or streamlined than the previous example of just wizard generated code. And look at the files here. All we have is one CPP source file and a resource header file and a resource file. Okay? So for a small scaled down project, this is what we want to do. And if you need to refer back to this video, go ahead. But for each new project, I'm going to make the assumption that you're creating a nice, small, scaled-down MFC template or application to allow you to interface with the MFC API. Now, you can use the wizard to generate your applications and programs if you want, but you're going to have all those extra files and all those extra items. And a lot of times they just get in the way in a small project, and they just kind of bloat it when you build it and compile it. So it depends, but this is what we'll be doing for several future projects. Finally, build your project to make sure it links and compiles properly. So with everything set up, let's build it and test it. Make sure we don't have any null pointers or null objects that would cause it to crash at runtime. So I'm going to rebuild the solution. Check our syntax. Alright, syntax looks good, and let's run it. Check it for runtime errors. Alright, and there's just a basic bare empty dialog. Okay.